Alrighty, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. It is the end of the month, which means I'm here with another monthly wrap-up of everything that I read and my TBR for July. So the first one that I finished was one that was actually on my TBR, and that is Project Hail Mary. I'll put the cover over here somewhere. I ended up giving Project Hail Mary 4 stars. Yeah, so basically the plot of this book is you have this guy who wakes up in space, he's completely disoriented, has no idea what's going on. The only thing he can remember is that he is on a mission to save Earth. And that's pretty much the premise of the book. That's about as much as I can say without like giving stuff away. But overall I really liked it, hence the 4-star rating, but there was a little bit of language. There's also a couple times in the book where I felt like he's on this life or death save all of humanity mission and we're just getting distracted by things that like didn't really matter too much to actually saving Earth. So that's probably where my main frustration with the book was. I thought that the author did a really good job of explaining the really technical stuff. It is a sci-fi book and there are lots of really complicated like words and bits of science involved in all the stuff that he's doing in order to save Earth. I did think it was really impressive how well the author was able to put all of the super scientific stuff in there, but make it easy enough that the reader can follow along. The other thing that bugged me about the book is there's no POV of like what's happening on Earth. So you just have to like assume what's going on down on Earth while he's like off on this mission to save them. And so that part kind of bugged me a little bit too. I wish that there was either like a second book that like explained what happened while he was in space, or that there was like a dual POV type of a thing. Just something that it was like you knew what was going on with all the rest of humanity while he's off in space trying to save them. But those are pretty much my complaints. Overall, I thought it was a pretty good book. I would recommend if you're into sci-fi. I thought the audiobook was really well done. I thought that the voice actor did a really good job with it. I'm still pretty new to audiobooks, so I thought that he was a pretty good one. I don't know. Maybe he's not good if you've listened to a lot of audiobooks and compared to other ones, but for somebody who hasn't listened to very many audiobooks, I thought it was pretty well done. Then, the next book that I finished, also an audiobook while we were driving, is The Sentence is Death by Anthony Horowitz. This is book 2 in a series. I talked about the last one in my May wrap-up, so if you're interested in my thoughts on book 1, I will link that video up above. I did give this one 3.5 stars. I gave the first one 4 stars. I think that the first one was a little bit better than the second one, just as far as plot and character development and stuff like that. Just the mystery in the second one I didn't like as much as the mystery that was happening in the first one. But basically what these books are is there's a detective, I forget his name's Hawthorne. So there's this detective named Hawthorne and he approaches an author and asks the author if he wants to write a memoir about him. But the fun twist is that the author he approaches is the author of the book. So Anthony Horowitz is like one of the main characters in his book. So that's where the fun kind of twist comes from. And then he basically goes and follows Hawthorne around on his cases and writes books about them. And you get this whole like relationship. You're solving a mystery, you're also kind of trying to learn more about Hawthorne because he doesn't know much about him, and so that's kind of the premise of the book. The other thing that I didn't love about the second book as much as the first book is you have like the detective and then you have the author. The detective, Hawthorne, has like no longer works for the actual police department, he's like a private detective. But in addition to him, on all of these cases you have like a detective from the police department. And the one in the first book was like your classic, not quite as smart, trying his best, but not really like getting in the way type of detective. The second book, the detective from the police department was so annoying. And I just couldn't handle her. She was just such a frustrating personality, and I know that was the whole point of her and how he read it. That was the whole point of her character and that was how it was meant to be written, but I just could not handle her and I felt like she was just more frustrating than she was worth. She didn't like help the plot in any way, shape, or form. We didn't learn anything new about Hawthorne really. We didn't like, there just wasn't much of a reason for her to be that annoying. So that was my biggest complaint from book 2 versus book 1, is that the detective from the police department was not nearly as fun and didn't add nearly as much to the story. After those 2 audiobooks, we finally made it to Charlotte, where I am right now in our Airbnb. And so I started reading some physical books again. And I started with the Mistborn Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. These covers aren't the most helpful for this, but it starts with Mistborn, the Final Empire, then the Well of Ascension, and then the Hero of the Ages. I think I got that order right. If you don't know what Mistborn is, it's a high fantasy series. That's really hard to explain. Basically, within this, it's kind of dystopian vibes. You have what's called the Final Empire that is ruled by an emperor called the Lord Ruler. He's basically this like immortal god, all-powerful being that rules the Final Empire. Within the Final Empire, we're kind of in a dystopian type of a world where ash is falling from the skies. We have a very strong set up class system where you have the Lord Ruler, you have the nobles below him, you have kind of like the working class, and then you have the slave class called the Ska. And the main characters that you are following are part of some thieving crews. So aside from those, you also have the people who have decided to leave their duties as either merchants or as like slaves, and they become the thieving crews, the rebellions, and you basically have this thieving crew that comes together and they are trying to take down the Lord Ruler. That's about as much as I can explain about the plot without giving away spoilers, but it does get way crazier from there. Obviously this is a very big trilogy, so there's a lot that goes on. You learn a lot of interesting things about the lore behind the Lord Ruler and how he came into power and stuff like that. In addition to all of that that's going on, there's also a super complicated magic system. The magic system in these books is all centered around metals, and so people can ingest metals and then burn them within their bodies to utilize them as magic. Different metals result in different magical powers and abilities. Some people are able to utilize all of the metals, some people are only able to utilize one, and that's kind of the basis of the magic system, is it's all centered around metals. And again, it gets way more complicated. You learn a ton of stuff about that. This is my first Brandon Sanderson book, but from what I can tell, all of his magic systems are super complicated and stuff like that. The one interesting thing about it is I feel like there's not a huge world building chunk at the beginning. It's not like a lot of fantasy series where the whole first book is just like world building and you finally get into like the actual plot. I feel like the first book has a pretty good plot because he kind of makes it so that you learn things along with the main characters. And our main characters are pretty uninformed at the beginning of the book, so you're slowly getting the world building along with them throughout like the whole trilogy. So it's definitely not the most intimidating when it comes to like having a massive amount of world building that you have to deal with at the beginning before you can even get into the plot. You jump right into the whole plot of overthrowing the Lord Ruler and you're learning the world building as you go. So I did think that that was really good. I did end up giving all books 5 stars, so 5-star series for me. I thought they were all really done. I will say each of the books kind of had like a slow middle section, but it wasn't so bad that I felt like it needed to be docked on the rating system. I think it is just crazy impressive how much he is able to write these like super complicated worlds with these super complicated magic systems, and the like theology behind it all and stuff like that is just wild. That is the Mistborn series. I won't go too more in depth because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone. It is really good. I did read these super fast. They're kind of hard to put down once you get into it. So I would highly recommend the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. While I was kind of going through the Mistborn series, I had my mom come out and visit and we drove up to DC. On our drive back, we ended up listening to an audiobook. This one is super random. It's a short story by Agatha Christie and it's called The Jewel Robbery at the Grand Metropolitan, and it's like a Hercule Poirot short story. So it was literally only like 30 minutes. It's super, super short. I thought it was good. It's definitely not on the level of like her novels. I gave it 4 stars. I think it was a good overview of kind of how the Hercule Poirot books are set up. You have this crime, he comes in, he pulls out all of these little details that nobody else pays attention to, and he solves it even though they thought it was a closed case, kind of a thing. So it is a really good intro. I don't know if I feel like you would appreciate it more as like your first intro into Hercule Poirot and trying to like learn about who he is to see if you'd be interested in the other books, or if I think you'd appreciate it more if you've already read some of his books and you can like appreciate all his little quirks and stuff. So I don't know, I'll leave that up to you. I don't need to dwell too much on this. It's basically exactly what the title sounds like. There's a jewel robbery and Hercule Poirot comes in and solves it. Alright, then the next book that I picked up was another Agatha Christie. This is the ABC Murders. This is another Hercule Poirot. He is my favorite detective by her so far. I have read one Miss Marple book and I didn't love her as much as Hercule Poirot, but this one I think is the one that is often called her favorite, that she like says is her favorite Hercule Poirot that she wrote. And I agree that it's really well done. I did give this one 5 stars. I felt like this one was a little more unique compared to some of the other Hercule Poirot books that I've read. Essentially what this book is there is a serial killer who starts killing people alphabetically. So you have, he kills Miss Asher from Andover, and then Betty Bernard from Bexhill, and Sir Carmichael Carl from Churston. So you like get these like ABC murders, is exactly what it is. And Hercule Poirot is trying to catch this serial killer. And even in this book, he like mentions that this is pretty different from a lot of his cases. I don't feel like Hercule Poirot does many serial killers. He's more of like a closed, somebody got murdered by someone close to them. Not so much of a like random killings type of a thing, but I thought it was really good. This is the first Hercule Poirot book that I've read where he's like stumped genuinely and has no idea where he's going with it kind of a thing. So I thought this one was a really interesting one. The one thing about this book is it does reference a lot of other cases that he solved in. I'm assuming there are other books. The Hercule Poirot books do technically have an order. I've been reading them all sorts of out of order, just kind of in the order they interest me. But after reading this one, I feel like I need to go back and like start reading them in order because he referenced a lot of other cases. I guess the other like person that he's working with in this book has showed up in another case, but I don't recognize his name. I'd have to go Google it and figure out what other book this guy is in. So I think after this I might go and start trying to read them in like the correct order, because it's making me interested to see if I'm missing other things, because these were so blatantly references to other cases that I know I must have missed something. So now I'm wondering if the other books have referenced previous cases and I've just like missed it because I am not reading them in order. That's my thoughts on the ABC Murders. I think this one's really good. Would highly recommend, like all Agatha Christie books. Alright, the next book I read, continuing with the mystery thriller genre, was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. I did end up giving this book 3.5 stars. It's probably more on the side of like a 3. Basically what the premise of this is there are these college friends who, while they were in college, one of their friends got murdered. And it's supposedly a closed case, but the main character isn't 100% sure that she thinks who got pinned with it did it. And they are now 10 years later going back for homecoming, because I guess this university invites the like classes back 10 years after their graduation for like homecoming. Anyways, so they go back for homecoming. They're pretty much determined to try and figure out what really happened that night. And you're basically following through kind of as the person who died's younger brother plays kind of detective, along with, they're all kind of playing detective, trying to figure out what really happened the night that she was murdered. Overall, it's like, okay. I wouldn't say it's the best thriller I've ever read. As far as content goes, this is a kind of your classic dark academia where they're college students and they're kind of just drunk all the time and you're just like, these are such unreliable people. There also was one scene, my husband read it before I did, and so he flagged one scene for me that he was like, just skip it. It's kind of spicy and not pertinent to the plot. So it's like page, what is this? Page 77 to like the end of that chapter 8 is a scene that he said to just skip. So I skipped it. I don't feel like I missed anything. So just a heads up, if you don't like reading like sex scenes, there is one in this. If you know where to look though, you can easily skip it. I will say this is, my husband kind of hated this book, and his big complaint about it was that he felt like there wasn't like a big reveal at the end. And it's definitely a book where you're kind of going through and you're just like checking people off. And you're like, all right, this person is cleared, let's move on to the next suspect. This person's cleared, and you're kind of going through each person like at a time. So you're getting the story from one point of view until you've eliminated everyone, and then it just is the last person left. So it's definitely not like if you like a big reveal at the end kind of a book, this isn't it. The main character is also not particularly likable. She's super messed up and just has so many issues. She's not like necessarily a character that you're super rooting for. So overall it's just kind of meh. And then the last book that I read this month is kind of super random. It is The Family Romanov by Candace Fleming. This book was given to me by my mom. My mom likes to go to these book conferences every once in a while. That there's like lots of authors and they talk about the books and then you can go and buy their books. So she went to a book conference, I don't even know, this beginning of this year? No, end of last year. And while she was there, Candace Fleming was there, and so she got this book for me. It is signed, so that's fun, by the author. But essentially this author, what she does is she writes historical novels, is probably the best way to put it, where it's all based on facts and true stories in history, but it's written in like novel format, more so than like a typical history book that's just laying out facts for you. So there's like a lot of places where she's gone through different letters and journals and things, and she's put in basically dialogue. So it's insane how much dialogue you have, but it's following the family of the Romanovs, obviously the classic like Anastasia story, but a true, real story. It starts a little bit before Anastasia's dad takes over as the Tsar, and then pretty much follows up until their deaths. I will say this book, I learned a lot of things I didn't know about the whole revolution, the true story of Anastasia, the family Romanov, all of the things. I did learn a ton. It's definitely written more for like a YA. I did give this book 4 stars. I think my only complaint, really, aside from it just like not being the most gripping story where it's like all true stuff, facts and stuff, it's not like written for the shock factor, you know what's gonna happen. My only other complaint is there was a few times where I feel like she could have gone a little more in depth. And granted, it was written for like a younger audience, I think. But I personally, there was a few times where I was like, oh, I feel like she kind of is skimming over details, especially at the beginning. I think either I would have preferred for her to start where she actually starts going in depth with stuff, or to give me more details at the beginning. Because the like first little lead up to him becoming the Tsar is just like so rushed that I'm either like, just leave that part out and let's just start with he's the Tsar now, or like give me some more details on that. But I did learn a lot. It is still so crazy for me to wrap my mind around this story and the fact that it happened so recently. But it is really interesting if you want to know like the true story based on facts and actual documents. She is really good at doing research and having lots of primary sources that give you real information about the story. So if you want to know the true story, not just the like version that everybody has created based off of tall tales, this is a great way to consume it. It's super easy to sit down and just read. I originally picked it up because I was just going to read like a little bit at a time, and then I ended up just sitting down and reading the whole thing. So it is really well written. It's super easy to get through if you want to dabble into the true story and into like the history, non-fiction genre, but you want it to read easily. She's a great option. She's got lots of other books too, so if she has a book on another topic that you find more interesting, I think she would be a great author for starting into nonfiction. Alright, with that being said, this is everything, falling, that I read in June. So I think I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 books? I think 9 books, once you count the audiobooks, if you count that short story, that I read in June. So that's that part of the video. We can now move on to my July TBR. The first books that I'm planning on reading in July are actually for a video that I'm planning on doing, and it's these 4 books. See if you can guess what the video is based off of them. 2 of them are shorter books. The first one is The Promise by Silvina, I think that's how you say her name, Silvina Ocampo. I think this is actually just like the coolest little cover. It looks so artistic. But basically this is a short story about a woman who falls off a boat, and I think she like passes out or something. So then she comes conscious and sees her like cruise ship leaving her, and she's like stranded in the ocean. And you're basically just following her like train of thought as she is stranded in the ocean thinking she's going to drown. Then the next book I plan on reading is The Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This one is a magical realism book that I don't totally know the plot of. It sounds like, I'll just read the back. A man returns to the town where a baffling murder took place 27 years earlier, determined to get to the bottom of the story. Just hours after marrying the beautiful Angela Vicario, everyone agrees Bayardo's son Roman returned his bride in disgrace to her parents. His distraught family forced her to name her first lover, and her twin brothers announced their intention to murder Santiago Nassar for dishonoring their sister. Yet, if everyone knew the murder was going to happen, why did no one intervene to stop it? The more that is learned, the less is understood, and as the story races to its inexplicable conclusion, an entire society, not just a pair of murderers, is put on trial. So, it sounds like a murder mystery, but in magical realism format, I think. He's like supposed to be a big magical realism author. I feel like this seems much more cohesive of a plot than the only other magical realism book that I've ever read. That is Chronicle of a Death Foretold, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Then the next book that I have is Juan de la Rosa by Nathaniel Aguilera. I am probably butchering that, but that's what this book is. Basically, this one is set in Bolivia, with kind of after the revolution, the Civil War, something like that. Bolivia's struggle for independence. So I guess it's more of a revolution, but it's basically narrated by one of the last surviving rebels of this town in Bolivia. And it's pretty much telling his story of being part of the rebellion and how he came to be part of it. It sounds very much so like one of those books where there's not a super big plot, you're basically just following a character's life. So that's Juan de la Rosa. This one's a little bit longer. And then the last book that I have for that video that I plan on filming is The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. And this one is also a little hard to explain the plot. It sounds like it's maybe like a family epic type of a thing. Where you have like multiple generations, you're kind of following the family through their lives, and potentially one of them is in touch with the spirit world or something like that, can maybe speak to spirits, something along those lines. But I think ultimately it is like a family epic where there's not like necessarily a super intense plot, again kind of like Juan de la Rosa, where you're just kind of following them through their lives and seeing how their lives turned out. But I think this cover is so pretty. So I'm excited to read this one. Then, aside from the video, the books that I picked, I've got two mysteries that I plan on reading. The first one is We Were Liars. This one had a lot of hype kind of at the beginning of like Book Talk, Bookstagram, BookTube, all of that when it started becoming a viral thing. But this one got really big and I never got around to reading it. I know pretty much nothing about it other than that they like go to an island or the coast or something. It seems like a family drama, and I'm assuming somebody dies at some point and that there's a good twist at the end. Is pretty much all that I know about this. So I'm looking forward to finally figuring out what this book is actually about. And then the second mystery thriller that I have is And Then You Die. This one I found at a thrift store, and I got first taken in by the title and then second by the cover, which I think is just so fun and summery. So this seems like the perfect summer read. But basically it's about an Italian detective who survives an assassination attempt and then ends up going into basically protective custody slash like hiding. I can't tell how much he's like actually got protection. Because he's supposed to testify against a big mafia boss. But then a dead body shows up on the beach that he's hiding out at, and he starts to wonder if they've found him. So it sounds like an interesting police on the run trying to figure out a murder whilst also running and hiding from the mafia. And then the last book that I have on my TBR for July is Speaker for the Dead. This is the second book in the Ender's Game series. I feel like everybody knows and talks about the Ender's Game, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about the rest of the series. In fact, I didn't even know it was a series until I finished reading it, or maybe I went to buy Ender's Game and I was like, whoa, there's other books. But this one I think picks up right after it. From what I can tell, in like the Ender's Game saga, there's tons of books and the timelines are a little hard to figure out. Some of them end up being prequels, some of them are after Ender's Game, and it's kind of complicated to figure out how the reading order goes. I've decided I want to read this one next, and then I have to do more research to figure out what I actually want to read. I think there's kind of different series almost within the saga, but this one is the one that most directly seems to come chronologically after Ender's Game. So, this is the one I'm going to read next. Alright, those are the books. I think I've got 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, those are the 7 books that I'm hoping to read in July. I do have a few more books here with me in Charlotte, so we'll see. I may try and get to more if I can, but these are the ones that I for sure want to get to this month. So, thank you so much for watching. If you've read any of the books that I read this month, I'd love to know your thoughts on them. Or if you've read any of the books that I'm planning to read in July, I'd also love to know your thoughts and any other recommendations that you have for me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye.